Hey everybody, Gleb Alexandrov here for CreativeStream.com. Welcome to the typography tutorial. Typography is everywhere. Whenever you create a thumbnail for your YouTube video or design a wedding postcard or post something to Instagram, by learning the basic typography rules, you make sure that you can convey the message in the most effective way. And well, typography is sexy, so let's explore 10 typography tips and best practices. Let's start with a visual hierarchy. This block of text is readable, it serves its purpose, but the visual impact of this block of text would be much stronger if it had a stronger hierarchy. Just by resizing the elements and giving the emphasis to a visual hierarchy in this case, you make the message easier to get at the glance. Just ask yourself what part of the message should really pop. In what order do I want this to be read? How can I make this easier for the reader? This is a hierarchy, and the next rule is don't use two similar fonts. In this example, you can see two fonts that look very similar, Volcorn and Robotoslab. Both of these fonts have serifs, and because of that, they look kind of similar, and that's uncomfortable. Instead, let's take a pair of fonts, one of which has serif, and the other one sans serif, or with no serifs. Also notice that they have a different weight. The top one is bold, and the bottom one is hairline, or we can reverse it. Anyway, the key to finding the good pair of fonts is contrast. Even if you use the fonts from the same family, like Oswald, you can write one part of the copy using all caps and increase the tracking, or we can call it letter spacing. Do what it takes, but make sure that the font don't look too similar, and also try to not use too many fonts. There's a nice tool for pairing fonts called mixfont.com. There's the artificial intelligence-based generator, which you can use to try to find these cool font combinations. And you can press this button to refresh it. If you got stuck with finding the right typefaces for your project, give it a shot. It even shows, if you scroll down a bit, how these typefaces will look in different contexts. By all means, that's not a silver bullet, but if you struggle to find the right combination of fonts, it may give you a head start. Alright, the next thing to keep in mind is white space, or negative space. Clumping design elements together like you see here is one of the most common typography mistakes. Design elements need some air to breathe. Separate the elements from each other by adding the empty, or we say white space in between them. This negative space will also allow you to group the elements in a logical way, based on their relationship or lack of relationship to each other. White space means not only the space between the objects, but also the margins outside the object. So if you can, stay away from the edges of the image. Alignment is the next typography rule. Without the proper alignment, elements just fall apart. For easy reading, make sure that your text is aligned in the proper way. That means that the elements are grouped according to their logical relationships, like all the social media links are grouped together in this example. The blocks have the white space in between them, and here all elements are aligned to the center of the image, or to some imaginary line that runs across the elements. We also can align elements to the left, or to the right, but no matter what we do, it's good to stay consistent throughout the design. One way to approach it is to draw an imaginary grid on top of all elements. Then you can align everything according to this grid and avoid the parts that penetrate the outer walls of the grid. Inside this space, again, it's good to be consistent. Say, let's align all the elements to the left, but at the same time we can align the title and the photo using the central line. And if the design blocks are repeated, we also repeat the same alignment rules. Yay for consistency. The point of great typography is to make the text readable, not only fancy. Nobody wants to stare at gobbledygook. To make the text readable, make sure that it has enough contrast with the background, that it has appropriate space between characters or tracking, sufficient size, that's important, and white space around it. And finally, the fonts without bells and whistles are easier to read, so fight for readability in every way possible. If you want to take your typography to the next level, learn the basics of color theory. Fortunately, there are many tools and websites that will help you with the basics of color theory. Color.adobe.com, for example. There you can just choose a color rule, monochromatic, triad, complementary, compound shades, and so on. And then you just click and drag these circles to set the root color, and Adobe helps you to set up the color harmony. So you can pick the sandy color, and this website will build the perfect complementary contrast. Then you can apply this set of colors to your design. Or maybe you'd like to try something else, the compound color rule, for example. Definitely, that's a very interesting way to learn this. Kind of a learn by example thing. And voila, this is the compound color harmony applied to your typography. Okay, fantastic. One more resource that I'm dying to share with you is Color Hunt. Actually, it's colorhunt.co. Here we have a bunch of ready-to-use color schemes created by the community. You can switch to popular or random, just scrub down and pick whatever you like. And after you selected something from this list, you can see the hex codes for the individual colors. These hex codes are used to describe the color and use it later on in GIMP, Krita, Photoshop or whatever. Oh, I love these colors actually. My favorite shrimpy color. So we have already been talking about contrast for quite a while. It makes text enjoyable to read, it helps to harmonize fonts, it makes things pop. The first type of the contrast to keep in mind while doing the text design is the size contrast. This is closely tied to hierarchy. Then we have this weight contrast. Try using the fonts from one family but with the contrasted weights. By the way, this font is called Quicksand. If you want to be creative with your typography, color contrast is your friend. It can be split into 3 components. First one is value contrast. Arguably, this is the most prominent one, the difference between light and dark. It makes things readable. Another contrast we can use is saturation. If we use just a saturation contrast, this is a little bit weaker than the value contrast. And finally, the hue contrast tells us how far apart are the colors on the color wheel. Often it's the least intensive type of contrast. It's neither good or bad, it can be used differently depending on the different contexts. For example, look at this. I think it looks beautiful. Just a subtle hue contrast going on. One less common way to add the contrast is to play with tracking or letter spacing. But my friend, never ever stretch the font. Never ever. The final type of contrast that we need to know is style contrast. As we have already said, try clashing fonts with complementary moods. That looks far more elaborate, intriguing and beautiful than just 2 similar fonts. As any typography nerd will tell you, consistency and simplicity is good. Be humble. Stick with no more than a couple of fonts per image. Limit the cheesy effects like gradients and shadows. Use repetition to your advantage and stick to one visual language throughout the image. Remember the KISS mantra. Keep it simple, stupid. The next thing is layout. The layout in typography is simply how you arrange the text on the page, or rather in the image. You can be creative with the layout. Ask yourself, where do I want to place the text? Do I want it to flow around the Gleb's left shoulder? Or maybe I want to slap it to the back wall, so it kind of stays behind the figure for this parallax effect. Or maybe add a little bit more pseudo 3D. All in all, it's worth experimenting with the layout and making the text interact with the image. As a finishing touch, add some chocolate chips. It can be anything as long as it adds to the overall oomph factor. It can be labels, icons, lines, hand-painted elements, modified symbol like reversed V letter instead of the A letter, extra irregularities like this dot beneath the F letter. Use variety and non-textual elements to bring the extra cool to your typography. Now go ahead and try this tip by making the new cool typography for your Instagram. Alright guys, thanks for watching. That was Gleb Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com. Feel free to subscribe to our channel and share this video. That's very important to us. Just go ahead and share this a million times. Drink more coffee and we'll change the world of computer graphics.